And when I asked for a bio from Dan, he just said, third generation pilot family from Fairbanks. Well, that's a little short, so I found something a little longer. Dan is the president of the Palm Springs Air Museum. The museum opened in 1966 with 2 hangars and 14 vintage aircraft, and has grown substantially under Dan's leadership, during which he has overseen the expansion of the museum, including the addition of new hangars and exhibits. The museum now encompasses 5 themed hangars, outdoor displays, and a visitor center, attracting 100,000 visitors annually. Dan will regale us with his tales of Alaska flying adventures and misadventures. Of particular interest would be the unusual challenges presented by flying without facilities, as well as a lack of infrastructure sprinkled with interesting Alaska aviation history and personal experiences. Remember when this all started, there were no flying schools that taught glacier landings, beach and sandbar landings, gravel bar landings, or mountaintop or ridge landings. These intrepid aviation pioneers just had to figure it out. So Dan, tell us how you figured it out.
Wow. Well, that's
Gotta be loud and cool.
well, usually my voice travels pretty far, but no, that was a great introduction. I think of myself as a volunteer at the Air Museum. I know there's several volunteers here, and I want to thank everybody for that. But I live in an alternative universe down here. Born and raised in Alaska. Grandfathers were both entrepreneurs. Showed up there when there wasn't much, as far as infrastructure, and they were very innovative. I didn't skid in on their success. All I learned was common sense, and my parents were entrepreneurs. My mom and dad had a 121 airline, which there was only 5 121 airlines in Alaska at the time, back in the 60s and 70s. They operated DC-6s, F-27s, DC-3s, B-25s. They had a bunch of airplanes. My mom and dad, I think, owned over 200 airplanes. So, the conversation when there was an accident, not really at our business, but when something happened, we'd talk about it to nauseam, my dad and I could discuss, bad stuff. And like my dad said, you can learn something from everybody. And I go, yeah, and it may just be how not to do something. Those those guys that initially came to Alaska and started flying were just a rugged bunch, and there was a lot of luck. I find myself advocating for the unknown bush pilot. The guy that went out and flew for 45 years in Alaska and flew 37,000 hours with 20 type ratings, and nobody even knows who he was. You can go to YouTube and see a lot of action down there on the Matanuska River coming out of the glacier there east of Anchorage, and the guys in their bush planes that go up there for their weekend of fame. And it's some pretty crazy stuff landing on the gravel bars. It looks, but it's, they're landing on mile-long gravel bars. The guys I grew up with were landing C-46s and DC-6s on those gravel bars and Hercs, not landing Super Cubs. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of content on YouTube. And I don't think of myself as a bush pilot. I have friends that are bush pilots. I've got about 3,500 hours flying in Alaska, and I find myself spending more time anymore talking about flying rather than flying. I haven't flown right now for about 3 months. Been trying to work out some issues on a project I've had over at Chino since I had a brown full head of hair. But, with a lot of cash and some BS and some skill, I think we're going to get it done here pretty quick. But we put up some pictures I sent to Steve, and Steve was really good about it. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Just put one up and I'll start talking about it. I'll tell you a good story. So, this is a good one here. So, so when I was 6 years old, my parents bought 2 B-25s that were sitting in Fairbanks, pretty much derelict. One was a fire bomber, and the other one was a parts airplane. So my brother and my dad and one of their business partners put the two B-25s back together. And I was just totally incensed with the B-25 at about six years of age. I've flown one a little bit, not much, but that airplane just grabbed me as a kid. I can remember the day that I first saw a B-25, and I just was like, wow, this is a real airplane. So the parents got done with their B-25s in about, I don't know, it was the early 70s, and they were just sitting there on the ramp there in Fairbanks, derelict. And, I was always trying to figure out what we could do with the B-25s to make some money. Well, my dad was a $1,200 a month senior captain at Weems when him and my mom bought the B-25s in 67. So by 69, the summer of 69, in 6-week period, my mom and dad put $800,000 in the bank on a government contract with two B-25s in a 6-week period. And I tell people this, it sounds kind of crazy. We were like the Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, we moved to Palm Springs. My parents bought a home in South Palm Springs. And of course, all my crazy stories about flying and what my parents did. I mean, most people didn't know what a B-25 was, when we were 10 years old. But I used to try to get my dad to bring one of the B-25s down to Palm Springs, and he goes, well, what would we do that for? And I said, I don't know, Dad, maybe start a museum or something. Then people might believe that we own B-25s. Well, you fast forward to about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, there's a B-25 in the Palm Springs Air Museum. And I'd been there a couple of times, and it didn't look like our B-25. It didn't resemble it at all. Our B-25 was in bare metal, had a big Seagram 7 on the tail. And we walked around it, my dad and I looking at it, and he goes, God, this thing looks familiar. Well, maybe all B-25s look familiar. Well, the internet came alive, and then you can figure out anything, right? Anything. Conspiracies, the whole thing. Well, that was our B-25. I was like, holy cow. So it kind of drew me into the museum. But so at 14 years old, I said to my dad, we got to do something with these B-25s. I'm going back. And so this one was sitting on the end of the runway. They stripped all the parts off in it. And I'll get back over here so you can see me. I'm sorry. And I go, Dad, I'm going to go grab those two B-25s sitting over there. And he goes, what for? I said, well, I can just hook onto them with a tug and drag them over here. They'll be mine. He goes, what in the hell would you want those things for? I said, I don't know, Dad. So he goes, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a B-25. And I go, really? Well, I learned something about title and ownership at that point because I didn't get it titled in my name. That B-25 is now in the Palm Springs Air Museum. This was one of the B-25s that was sitting over there. And they ended up picking it up with a Sikorsky sky crane and hauling it down to Wasilla. And it sat there in a guy's yard for, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years. And he sold it to a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who was on the board of the Palm Springs Air Museum for $50,000. And it's still sitting down here in Ocotillo Wells. They never did anything with it. But that same airplane. So, I follow the pedigrees of the airplanes, but my dad didn't see any value in owning these things. He sold the one B-25 for $2,500 to Merrill Ween, one of his buddies. And the other one, he sold it to some guy in Australia. So that was my B-25 thing. And this one still kind of looks like that. It's sitting down in Ocotillo Wells if you want to see it. So when we move on to the next one there, see what I put up. I sent these pictures to Steve, and he was so good to put them all together. Oh, that's just a great picture. That's in front of my house, east of Fairbanks, for you military pilots that flew in and out of Eielson. It's off the east end of Eielson on the approach end. You fly right over the top of that lake, and that is a beaver that came out of Ontario, and it's polished, which is kind of unusual for a beaver. and it's the lowest time beaver in the world. And I really like flying it. It's set up. It performs really well. I flew it quite a bit last summer, but you can see why a person would want to live in Alaska. And that lake's got 350 cabins on it. It doesn't look like it there. And that's like in September when everybody pulls all their boats and all their crap out, all their boat houses and everything. So it kind of looks like a remote lake, but it's not remote. But it's a wonderful airplane. It's, like I said, it's noted. It's November 65 Whiskey Golf, and it was one of the last beavers built. And Hucker Sidley bought it, shipped it to Australia, and it was never uncrated. It was in a crate down there for years, and a guy in Ontario bought it. And it's like it was built at the factory. It's really a cool airplane. So anyway, you can move on from that one. Well, that's my favorite airplane there. That's my PA-12. Some kids over in Flay Bob built that for me. I flew my 12 down from Fairbanks one winter. That was quite a trip, 32 hours. And they took it apart, and they said, well, this thing's so wore out, we can't fix it. And I go, oh, great. What am I going to do now? Well, I bought a new PA-12 and parts, new fuselage, new wings, new spars, new ribs, new control surfaces, everything brand new. And we built that airplane from scratch. And it's a 1946 PA-12, and it's fun to fly. It's like a little beaver. It's like does 1/3 of what a beaver does, I tell everybody. But it's those kids did a wonderful job over at Flay Bob. It just took a while, and we're still good friends. And that's in front of my hangar at Chena Marina. Chena Marina lies west of International, about a half a mile. So we're in the airport traffic area. So there's always a lot of conflicts going in and out of there. But yeah, we can move on if we can, please. Oh, that's a great photo, and that's how not to do the flower drop at Palm Springs Air Museum. Now, I didn't know this, okay? So I was there before I got on the board one Memorial Day, and one of Bob Pond's pilots was flying the B-25, and he had Mary Bono on board, and he literally ripped the bob wire off the top of the fence line going by in our old B-25, and I was like, I don't know if I could top that. But anyway, I had no idea at the time. You know, my buddy and I are flying it. My buddy Carl's in the left seat. He's the guy that owns that B-25 that was in the first picture. And we decided, I did it 3 years in a row. And you can see that that's how you do it. Now they're doing it from about 1,000 feet. And, you know, we knew when we did it, we could get violated. I didn't care. You know, it's not unsafe. You got two engines running. You're doing 180 knots, and the airplane flies really good on one engine. The only thing you worry about when you're doing the flower drop, believe it or not, is a hammer or a wrench or something falling out of the gun bay. And I helped load the carnations just for that reason. You got to be very careful. If something came out of the bottom, that would be very bad. There's usually 3,000 or 4,000 people there, and my wife was there one flower drop, and she's filming it for the family with her phone, and she goes, come on, honey, and she goes, and I see the doors open. It was probably this thing, and she just puts her head down and goes, ah, shit, and all the flowers hit her. I mean, we just nailed it. But you know, we did that 3 years in a row, and it was a little challenging, but I kind of got minimized for doing that. Some of the other people that were flying with us that day didn't approve of that. Well, it's a personal choice is what it is. I mean, I don't look at it as like a committee could never figure to do that. I think Fred Bell probably had a cow when he saw that, you know, but I had fun doing it. It's a great picture. And that's basically where we were at that altitude. I'd say we're at what? How high are we? Huh? Yeah, I think about 50 feet. Anybody think it's 50 feet? Yeah. Anyway, that was a fun day. So anyway, we can move on. Yeah, probably. This was a very interesting day in my life about, I don't know, it was in September of last year. So we're down on a remote lake, and that's not me in the picture. And a friend of mine whose family had had property on that lake for 100 years brought this picture out after a few sips of whiskey and a good steak and said, he goes, "Oh," I said, "I know who that is. That's Slim Moore. He was a hunter outdoorsman. And that was my friend's grandmother. And the guy in the center is a famous bush pilot named Joe Crossan. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Joe Crossan. He was from San Diego, and him and his sister Marvel Crossan were very noted. She was killed in an air race, a woman's air race east of here, I don't know, back in the 30s. Beautiful woman. She would have been probably the Amelia Earhart of the day. She was absolutely stunning, this woman. Anyway, that's her brother, Joe. They had built airplanes as teenagers in San Diego. And he came to Alaska. He worked for Juan Tripp. Juan Tripp hired him because he was, so well thought of, Joe Crossan. And he actually died of old age. So he didn't get killed in a bush plane. But the guy on the right is another character, Wiley Post. And so, I'm recognizing these people, and my buddy goes, "We don't know who the fifth guy is, the guy on the right." And I said, "Well," we were sitting down. I said, "Do you want to know who that is?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's my granddad." And I was just blown away. It was one of those moments, you go, wow. And so in 1933, when this picture were taken, they were down there bear hunting. And I know exactly where that ridge is. Where they were at is Paxson, Alaska. And it was a kind of a moment for me, because I never seen that picture of my grandfather before. And he was friends with Wiley Post. He was noted as taking one of the last photos of Wiley Post, and Grandpa was not a photographer. It was just in a book I found one day. So anyway, that picture really got me going. So anyway, I thought I'd mention it. So moving on. Oh God. So this is a good one. So I was one of the volunteers at the Air Museum showed me that picture, and he goes, "You have any idea what kind of airplane that is?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, then he showed me another picture, and that's taken in Palm Springs in 1967. I think there's a picture that follows it, maybe that it's got no, that's not it. Anyway, the picture was taken in 67. That's my mom and dad's Cadillac and my dad's airplane, my mom and dad's plane. And I said, "Where did you get this picture?" Well, he didn't really know where he got it. It's still a mystery to me because it's one of our personal family pictures, and I don't have that one. And anyway, it's like all things unbelievable in my life. It was I remember that day because my dad and I put that stripe on the side of the plane with tape, and I'm trying to hold it, and he's trying to get it straight, and we're standing on ladders and stuff. And the guys that were coming over were flying the jets. They were flying I think it was a Jetstar, and they were really enamored with that Lockheed Learstar. That was a Bill Lear design, and it had JATO on it, JATO assist, and it had really big engines on it. It would almost go nonstop from Fairbanks to Palm Springs, and I don't ever remember riding in it. I don't. My parents only had it for about 4 years. So we can go to the next photo. I sold this airplane to a guy. I don't tell too many people, but I do buy and sell airplanes occasionally. And you stay in your lane, you can make a little bit of money. I sold it for 3 times what I paid for it. But he needed an airplane pretty bad. He was a really nice guy. He sent me that picture. That was a fireworks display out at his lodge. He's got 3 beavers in his lodge. He's down at a place called Non-Dalton on Lake Iliamna, and a really fine guy. He's very good friends with Franklin Graham. Franklin Graham, the preacher, he spends about 2 months a year up there flying wounded warriors and stuff. And Bill Sims, who owns the airplane, his kids and daughter-in-law, they fly for that relief mission. It's called I'm sorry. No, it's they've got a DC-8. They fly to crises around the world, and his kid flies the DC-8. Samaritan's Purse is the name of it. Yeah. So we can move on. That's just a tale. That was a Civil Air Patrol Beaver that was in an auction in Anchorage. That one that the CAP painted one. It was really a nice airplane. I didn't have any trouble selling it though. It was really modified. This one here, I actually had purchased from Bill Sims, the guy that I sold the other Beaver to, about 5 years before I sold him the Beaver. And I said something to him about that airplane. He wondered how it was coming. And I said, well, geez, Bill, I paid $105,000 for it. It was in 1,000,000 pieces in a hangar in Anchorage. And there was about $100,000 worth of extra parts came with it. And you can put $100,000 worth of used Beaver parts in a milk crate. And these guys know what I'm talking about. It's unbelievable. So anyway, this airplane, I resurrected it out of parts. And it's also one of the lowest time Beavers in the world. It's got 6,100 hours on it, and it flies really nice. It's noted as one of the lightest Beavers there is. It came in at 3090 is what, 3081 is what it weighs empty, which is really light for a Beaver. I've got Beavers on wheels that weigh 3,350, some weigh 3,400 pounds, but it's just a basic stock Beaver. That's how we put it back together. The only thing it's not stock about it is that little door on the side. We want a little bigger one. And it's got a cabin extension all the way through where the green is on the side, and it's got bubble windows in it. I didn't want to take the bubble windows out. We left the bubble windows in, but it's got a NOS engine on it. I built a 985 out of all new pieces. There's not a used piece in the motor. And what you can still do with a 985 Pratt & Whitney if you want to spend the money. But anyway, it's a fun one. We call it, my friends named it Patches because it's not painted, but I love Patches. Anyway, we can move on. That's my 12 again. My buddy Super Cub's behind it. We were fishing on this lake. I always thought that was a nice photograph of an airplane on a lake in the fall. It's kind of, our fall in Alaska is really short. You know, we got about a month of flying, and man, you got to cram it in. So anyway, we can move on from that one. That was a DC-6 that used to belong to the CIA. And my parents bought it in about 75. And it's interesting, you'll note the N number on it. It's N151, which is a very unique number. And my dad paid for it, and they delivered it to Oakland, I believe. And when he picked it up, there were 4 R2800, overhauled R2800s in the airplane that weren't part of the deal, but they showed up with the plane. I used to load it, work on it, actually flew it. I've got time in my logbook. I actually have time in 4-engine radio-powered airplanes. When your dad owns the airline and he knows you're going to go to flight school, he stuck me in, they stuck me. He wasn't flying it, but I'd flown it with him. But I actually spent about 60 days in the right seat of the DC-6. I only had a private pilot's license, and it was a 121 airline. The co-pilot would get out so I could fly. I logged all the time. It's all signed off. I don't know how legal that is, but that's my life. Yeah, we can move on. Oh, so, you know, they say that guy looks like me. That's my dad. That's probably a good thing when your dad looks like you, right? Yeah. Anyway, Dad was quite a guy. He was about, I don't know, 37 or 38. That was a first year 180, you know, and great airplane. I think that's a 123 in the background. That was out at the retardant site in Fairbanks. And Dad was quite an aviator. I learned a lot from him. If I could do anything, would Be to ask him a few questions on why he didn't teach me this or teach me that, or maybe I just wasn't listening. So anyway, we can move on. That's a real pretty picture in front of our hangar in Payne Field. That's what our F-27s look like. I actually designed that paint job. I always loved that style, and my dad added the Delta to the tail. He had to put that on everything. Most of our airplanes that my dad and mom owned had Delta Golf end numbers, and they were consecutive numbers. My dad flew for Weens for 17 years and hated every minute of it. Uh, and they were always chastising him because he was doing stuff on the side. He had a Connie lease to him, a Beaver lease to his employer, and people were jealous. And they'd say, well, Gilbertson was down, doing moonlighting with his Lockheed Learstar down in Cold Bay, with a bunch of hunters or something. And so my dad said, well, make it real simple. I'll just put my in number on the side that's very distinctive, so we'll remove all doubt what I'm doing that day. And so we had 111, 222, 333, 444, 666, 777, 888. We had all these numbers on our airplanes. So they were really distinctive. But that's a pretty shot. So we can move on. That was an interesting photo. One night, my text messenger just started blowing up. My friends are saying, hey, your airplane's on the news tonight. And I go, what? And they go, yeah, there's a picture of it leading off the news in Fairbanks. And I go, oh, wow. So a couple nights later, I caught it. And so I reached out to the photographer, and they said it was taken down in the valley down south of Fairbanks, about 300 miles. And I knew that wasn't the case. I called the guy up. Thomas Pear was his name. He was a professional photographer. And that's an unretouched photo, believe it or not. That's the aurora about the middle of September. And that's my airplane sitting in front of my hangar. So I called him up, and he goes, yeah, I took that picture from, down in Glen Allen. He goes, yeah. And he goes, where are you calling from? I said, I'm calling from Fairbanks. And he goes, oh. I said, yeah, that's my airplane sitting in front of my hangar. And he goes, well, where do I send the photo? So he sent me a really nice photo of it. He was a real nice guy, but it kind of shows you, what it looks like up there. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the aurora. Anybody seen it like that? It's unbelievable. Even if you've seen it 1,000 times, it'll still floor you. So we can move on. That's one of the DC-3s. That's another 777. My parents bought all of Weens DC-3s in the summer of 68. Weens delivered 2 brand new 737 combis, which were serial number 6 and 7. They had a cargo door in the front and a removable bulkhead and seats in the back for the bush. And believe it or not, the 737 was designed to replace the DC-3. That was the design criteria for the 737. And right there, you can see it. I mean, they went from DC-3s to 737s in about 3 months. Yeah. So that was a really nice airplane. It was quite a bit of history of it flying in Alaska. It was there during the war. It wasn't, taken for the war because it was needed in Alaska for hauling the mail and people. And I flew that one a little bit. I landed it and took it off when I was about 18 from the left seat. We can move on. That was actually taken up in Santa Barbara. My parents were doing the maintenance on their fire bombers in Santa Barbara back in the early 70s. And my dad wanted to keep his employees working through the winter because he'd lose them all if he didn't. They'd made enough money with the firebombing contracts to bring everybody down and work on the planes. I mean, they'd bring the DC-6s down and load the cars in them and stuff, the people that were working for them. They're household goods. I rode down the DC-6 in a firebomber one time with my mom and dad and my sister and some old mechanic sitting in the back watching the engines for 10 hours. But that's a great photo. We can move on. There's one of the DC-6 firebombers. It's kind of fuzzy. I think I poached it off the internet. But my mom and dad in 69, after that wild year with the B-25s and moving to Palm Springs, my mom and dad bought a Pan Am DC-6. and gutted it and turned it into a fire bomber. That's actually the first civilian fire bomber that ever flew. You know, they're doing that with airliners today. My dad and mom did it in 69 and 70, and it was quite an airplane. Yeah, it ended up crashing in Fairbanks. The only airplane my parents ever lost, and I don't know, somewhere between 70 and 80,000 hours of flying in big airplanes. And they fueled it with, they converted it into a cargo plane in 74, and they fueled it with jet fuel. It took off, and all four engines quit at night and crashed into the city. Kind of a bad day. It was 50 years ago in February. So we can move on. That was a bad story. This is a unique one. I don't know how many of you know Stan Stokes, the artist. Everybody knows Stan. Yeah, a very dear friend of mine. This airplane, my parents bought in 63, and my dad went down to Costa Rica for about 3 months. I don't know what he was doing down there, but he was there for 3 months getting this airplane ready to go. It belonged to the Dutch airline KLM, and so the parents were the second owner of it. And several years after they sold it, the Rolling Stones toured the world in it. And Stan Stokes actually painted that and put the lips on the front. That's what it looked like in 1973. So that's hanging in my living room. I love that picture. So he brought the Connie back to life. It's still alive. It's still in the museum in over in England somewhere. It still retains the N777 Gulf. That's when all that stuff started. So yeah, we can move on. That's a really cool airplane. That's a Howard DGA on floats. I had this wild idea to sell my Tesla stock about 15 years ago and buy a Howard DGA. So that's probably the $6 million airplane. Every time I walk by that thing, I cringe, but it's a hell of a float plane, but it sure as heck ain't worth $6 million. That's what that stock's worth today. I think I sold it at 25. Anyway, it was a good deal. I paid 50 grand for the airplane, put it on floats. Everybody thought I was crazy. Why would you put this thing on floats? Well, my parents had one back in the 50s, and my dad said that was the best damn float plane he'd ever flown. And I said, Dad, you guys own beavers. He says, you heard me the first time. I said, okay. So I bought one and put it on floats, and it's a hell of a float plane. Hell of an expensive float plane. That's in front of my house. So it worked out pretty good. So it's I'm working on it right now, redoing the wings on it. So we can move on to the next photo. Oh, there it is on wheels. It's at my hangar. I actually pulled it out of the, I actually drove out to my ramp one night, and these guys were taking pictures of it, and we twisted it around, and my pickup just happened to be in the background. It wound up as a magazine cover somewhere, but it was funny that both colors are about the same. I have that truck down here in California now. I bought it from the original owner in Palm Springs in 1982. I was going to buy a new Corvette, and my future father-in-law talked me out of buying the Vet because he says I couldn't afford it. And I says, are you kidding me? I got the cash to buy it. I've been on the slope for 6 months. I had like 25 grand in my pocket. He goes, you can't afford it. So I went and bought that truck for $800, and it was probably a better investment than that Corvette was. So we can move on. Oh, that's a good one there. That's another Delta Golf. I couldn't find a consecutive number, so I put 113DG on it, and it was up on Mount McKinley. I used to supply airplanes for flight seeing for years. I did that fairly successfully, just in the fact that there was no crashes and nobody got killed with about 100 aircraft leases. And I had to really be careful. There were people getting hurt and killed and maimed all the time. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, my good customers were starting to kill a whole bunch of people. They couldn't find qualified pilots, and I got out of the business. So anyway, that was a great airplane. They most of the otters up on Denali or McKinley, whatever you want to call it, they're all turbine powered, and they're all red. Well, that was the only white one, and all the other pilots referred to it as Delta Ghost, because it was white flying up on Mount McKinley. I'm still getting ridiculed for that. But it was a hell of an airplane. That was a fun day. Me and my buddy went up there and rode up. I wasn't flying. Matter of fact, I fell asleep in the right seat. It was kind of a boring trip. It's a long way up there, but hell of an airplane. Probably one of the Bills owned them. Probably one of the best airplanes ever built for with it, then modified to a turbine. It's just an airliner. So we can move on. There's the Connie again. That's why the parents bought it, because that front end cargo door, it was convertible, and they were using it on a Navy contract up in Alaska. He leased it, like I said, to his employer. How does that work? Leasing your employer an airplane and then flying it for him. So kind of cool. You don't see very many convertible airplanes anymore like that. So we can move on. Oh, there's me and my dad again. That didn't come out too good, but that's one of my photos. And that was that same day that picture was taken with the tower. And I was, I don't know, 7 or 8. Dad was a pretty stylish guy. So we can move on. Now there's another crappy picture. That was taken the next summer in Alaska. So the Cadillac went back to Alaska, and so did the airplane. That's how fluid we were between Fairbanks and Palm Springs, believe it or not. That's on the ramp in Fairbanks. So we can move on. That's a bad picture. Oh, there's a great picture. I poached that off the internet. That's down at Lake Hood in Anchorage. A lot of beavers flying out of there. And that's actually one of our airplanes. If I say my wife would just slap me down. So I'd say one of our airplanes. So it's a pretty picture. So we can move on. There's my dad and a guy named Frank Tallman. He was the motion picture guy. They were friends. My dad tells me a funny story about Frank Tallman. They were filming this movie with the B-25. That's not the museum B-25. That's the other one. And Frank's really nice guy, older guy. And my dad, good looking guy. And he says this young gal comes running up and just happy to see Frank, gives him a big hug and kisses him on the lips. And Dad goes, damn, that's not his daughter. And she was about 23 or 24, and Frank was that age. He was quite a guy. He was killed not too long after that. He crashed into the mountains over there in Santa Ana in a barren or something in bad weather. But him and Dad were pretty good friends, so we can move on. I'm sorry?
Bad juju, barren crash is bad.
Yeah, it is. Any plane crash. That was me coming up from Canada. Oh, it was quite a day. I'd flown my Cub to Whitehorse the day before, and it took me almost 8 hours. And the wind was blowing so hard, it was blowing about 70. And then the next day I went back to Fairbanks with the Beaver, and it was 20 below that morning. And I flew back to Fairbanks in 4 hours in the Beaver. It was a nice trip. The day before was the crappiest flight I probably had in years. And the next day was like the best trip I've had in years. It was back to back. So anyway, fun day, good picture. I've had that Beaver for almost 40 years. And painted it 5 times, not myself, but I've had it painted 5 times, and it's a really good airplane. So we can move on. That's what one of my customers did with my nice little yellow Beaver. Left it in a lake and then hired some homesteaders to go out there and retrieve it, and they literally destroyed it. When my customer fell through the lake, he calls me up and he goes, I fell through the lake, and I said, yeah, I got a picture of it already. One of my other customers had flown over the lake and saw the airplane submerged in the lake, and they could hardly get out because they got wet. There was about 8 dogs in there and some big heavy-set gal, and Dave got wet, and they left it in the lake. It was there for about 6 weeks. There wasn't a helicopter to pick it out, so they could have picked it out and dried it out, probably flown it in the next day, but it didn't happen. It got frozen and just really wrecked it. I'm actually rebuilding it. It's got 38,000 hours on it, and I love rebuilding airplanes. I've been doing that, started with the models as a kid, and then it moved on to de Havilland Beavers. I've rebuilt several of them, and we build them back to basically new when we do it. But it's in the queue right now. I just hauled it up to Anchorage last fall. it's been in two different shops. I had one shop do the wings and the fuselage. Another guy does the control surfaces and final assembly. But we can move on. How are we doing as far as time?
Probably wrap up pretty quick.
Okay, all right. Oh, there's the B-25. That's the one that's over in Chino. I flew that one a tiny bit. I rode in them, but didn't fly them very much. That was taken in the early 80s in Painfield. It was themed up as a PBJ, and we can move on.
I think you're done now. We have more time.
Well, we can move on. I don't. That's a Howard DGA. I'm going to go fly it today, and I've been working on it for years, as I said. It was Carroll Shelby's airplane, the Ford, the Cobra guy, and it's been quite a project. It's a lesson in patience. I'm not used to doing business in California. I got to tell you, folks, this is one place you don't want to do business in. So it's been a rough go of it. But anyway, we're getting ahead of it, I think. But it's a beautiful airplane. It's really fast. First flight, it was indicating 174 miles an hour in cruise. And I bought a new prop for it. It should do about 190 in cruise. It's pretty fast for a fixed gear airplane. Fun as hell to fly. So we can move on. This is a video. And I don't know if it'll go or not. This is interesting. So, I don't want to put ourselves out as reckless pilots in Alaska, but there's a couple of my buds and somebody got it on video and it's like, and I can't show you the ones. This one got posted on the internet, so I don't care, but I get videos all the time from these guys and I can't share them. Watch this. So that's 80 Bravo. That's Howard Hughes's airplane. He bought it brand new, and it hauls fuel every day in Alaska. That thing it's still flying every day of the year, and they haul fuel in it. This guy is very interesting. Well, okay, no pressure. What time is it? Oh, I could go for about 5 more minutes. Everybody okay with that? You got a golf game or bar? Okay. This guy here, I like to speak for the guys that were not noted. And this guy was not noted. His name's Harold Gillam. I read the most profound book, and I'll show you a slide of it so you guys can take a picture of it, described what he did. He had 40 hours as a pilot and left on the shortest day of the year and flew to Siberia in a Stearman. So if you guys think you're tough from Canada, I got to tell you, we're tougher in Alaska. Because I tell you what, anybody fly a Stearman at -40, Harold Gillam did it. And Joe Crossan turned around. They were looking for Eielson. Eielson had crashed off the coast of Siberia, and they went to go find him like 2 weeks later. And Crossan, who was a very experienced bush pilot, turned back, and Gillam kept going. And this is him. That's what he looked like when he was flying. He was really a good-looking guy. He was actually engaged to Marvel Crossan, believe it or not. He looks like an ape. His grandkids look like Neanderthals. I know them. Literally, they look like the missing link. But this guy was a heck of a pilot. His name was Harold Gillam, and he disappeared in a Lockheed 10 coming up the coast. He was one of Morrison Knudson's pilots, and they had Morrison Knudson was a construction company in Alaska that had the best airplanes and the best pilots. And he was kind of minimized because he disappeared, but he had about 15,000 hours, and he literally pioneered the flights between Seattle and Juneau in that Lockheed. And he lost an engine, and they were scrambling the signals that he was using for the ADF because of the war, and the signal was off by 15 miles, and he went hit the side of a hill. And they all survived. One died at the scene later, and he died of exposure. He fell in a creek, and they found him wrapped in a parachute. And two of the other people came out, walked out about a month later. And it's quite a story. I'm trying to get the guy that wrote the book, whose father survived the accident, to come down and give a program at the Air Museum next year. That's him. Yeah. My dad was in with him at 4 years old, and he crashed on the end of Paxson Lake, but he fixed the airplane and they got to Valdez before the steamer left. But he was quite a guy. That's exactly right, Andy. We can move on. That's the Wien airplane that my dad leased, Wien. I actually rode to Fairbanks in it at 4. What's interesting about the picture, the A-26 is not the Folks's, either is the 180, but all the rest of the airplanes are my parents. The B-25, the Lear Star, and the DC-3 are all my parents' airplanes. So that's sitting in Fairbanks. The Lockheed came apart in flight. The B-25's in the Yanks Air Museum over in Chino. The DC-3, I don't know, and the Connie's over in England somewhere. Yeah, so we can move on. Oh, yeah. Next one, please. There's one of the beavers in rebuild. That's Patches. Show you what we did. The sheet metal work is superior to what they did when they built them. We have some, better corrosion stuff, better metals and stuff. But that's in the shop down in Wasilla. My secret guy that does all my work. We can move on. Next. That's just in front of my house. A nice day, nice picture. I typically, my wife drives. I fly out to the lake because I can go places from there. So that was in the fall, very nice. I was coming back from duck camp, I think, in that photo. We can move on. That's just a beaver takeoff. We don't need to see that one. We can move on. My buddy takes videos of me taking off all the time. I think he thinks I'm going to crash. And he's always, I don't like that, but I'm like, he's got about 10 really good videos of me taking off on wheels, landing, doing everything. And I'm like, I don't like it. I don't know why he does it. So we can move on. Next. Oh, there it goes. That's a fully loaded beaver with me flying it, going to hunting camp. And I've been flying that airplane for 40 years. And if you get off at my brown hangar there, that's 600 feet. Yeah. And I consider that one to be a dog, all my beavers. I've had it for 40 years. Every beaver I got performs better than that one does. So we can move on. Next. My buddy took that one too. That's over in Fallbrook. That's about a 300-foot takeoff. Now this airplane performs really well. It'll not even showing off. You can take off in 300 feet. So we can move on. Go to the next one. I want to get to those pictures. Oh, well, everybody's seen an airplane take off. Yeah, well, the tail comes up and she's ready to fly. Most tail dragger pilots don't know that. So that's how you learn how to fly a tail dragger. That tail comes up, she'll go. Just leave it at that attitude. Yeah, one more. I want to get to those books so you guys can take pictures. These 2 books, that's me and the spoiled rotten grandkid. Keep going. Keep going. That's Hap Arnold's DC-3. A buddy of mine owns it in Texas, I believe. We can move on. That's kind of a bad picture. There's a book. You guys want to read a good book? That's probably the best book on Alaska flying I've ever read. You can't put it down. And I was challenged when I bought it. My buddy said, you'll never find an original hard copy. I went to eBay, found it, and it was like $12. In that book, so just to preface this, so when Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic, he was a real sensational guy, and you guys might be offended when I tell you this. There was 8,000 ships in that shipping lane when he went across the Atlantic. Okay, it was a feat that he could make it without crashing, but there was 8,000 boats in that shipping lane. 4 months later, these 2 guys went across the top of the world from Barrow to Spitsbergen in a Vega by themselves, and it was unheard of. Nobody even knows about it. They flew 2,200 miles, and I'll tell you, a lot of the flyings in Fairbanks initially, and it's quite a story. I mean, it talks about Fokker, Anthony Fokker, and his airplanes and what they tried to do. For a pilot, it's a very, very good story, and it's a story of survival. You know, they went down on the ice, the pack ice. They're out there floating around. 18 days, they walked 100 miles to get off the pack ice, and the pack ice is moving. These guys were just incredible guys. So, and that was Carl Ben Eielson, who disappeared a couple of years later, one of our famous bush pilots that wasn't so lucky. That's a good one. And the next one, that's the second favorite book. That is one hell of a book right there. It should be a screenplay. Both of them could be screenplays. I just learned of these books in the last couple of months. A historian from San Diego shared it with me, an Alaska aviation historian. He says, you'll love these books. And I got to tell you, I couldn't put them down. I read them like in one day. So anyway, that's a good one. Okay, that's it. Wow. Oh. What do you want to do? Say again. Yeah. Well, you probably want to buy her that book. Yeah, the brown one. You would. You'll know a lot more about him. You know, incredible aviator. You know, we hear a lot about the Ween brothers. They were early aviators, but these guys, you know, because they died in the act of flying, they were kind of minimized. Maybe had, you know, bad luck, weather. So I'll just say this. So in 1955, a dear friend of mine and mentor, a bush pilot, went up and worked in Point Barrow with 5 other guys, young guys that were hand-picked bush pilots. These guys had skill. They were good pilots. So there's 6 guys living in a Quonset hut in Barrow in 1955, flying single-engine airplanes. In 6 months, 4 of them had been killed in airplane crashes. World War II did not have that attrition rate in aviation, just so you know. 2 out of 3 did not die. That's how tough the flying was. They had no weather reporting. You had to get a feel for it, flying the coast and stuff. But that's a pretty sad statistic. Yeah. But anyway, Eielson was incredible. You know, he was out of Fairbanks. When he disappeared, it was an all-out. His buddies all went out looking for him, and that's quite a story. That, you know, the Nook story in the Blue Book is really good about that. It's not so much about Eielson, but they were looking for him and found him, and then flew his body down to Seattle. I believe he was from North Dakota, and a very interesting guy. Really good-looking guy and a hell of a pilot. Unlucky that day, though.
Yeah. Oh, I just talk loud. Your grandfather, when did he, this is where it all started with your grandfather and so forth.
Right.
Where did he learn to fly? And that must have been very, very early.
Well, Grandpa was a real crappy pilot. That was one of the guys you learn how not to do stuff. My dad, you know, he ended up crashing. He was too mechanical. He's probably better, you know, on his D8, you know, than he was flying his airplane. He was, you know, he liked to hunt and fish, and he was buying new airplanes. He could afford them, and he had a horrible crash in downtown Fairbanks. But Grandpa was just a farm boy from Montana that headed to Alaska when he was about 19 years old. Had quite a story. He was 6'5", kind of a man's man, and he had different jobs. He was a plumber. He was a cop in Juneau for a while because he could handle the longshoremen pretty easily, being from Havre, Montana, and 6'5". Gold miner, entrepreneur. Go ahead. Yeah, the legend of Don Sheldon. Yeah. Actually, the airplane submerged in the lake. His son-in-law was flying it, And yeah, he was sensationalized, much like they turned him into a legend. I could do a program on Don Sheldon. He had 35 horrible accidents, 8 of them he should have been killed in. And he was sensationalized as a bush pilot and stuff. And some people would cringe me saying this, but I think he was over promoted. And those books were, there's guys that just go out, and I call it chopping wood every day. They're flying an airplane and nobody knows who the hell they are. There's no drama. They just work. And I know so many guys like that in Alaska you'll never read about in a book that just went out and flew every day. And everybody knows people like that. And I'm not one of them. So, any more questions? Oh, Bob's going to pick on me. Come on, Bob, give me a good one.
Yeah. I don't know if you know of this guy, but one time back in the mid-80s, one of us flew into, I think it was Cold Bay, and then we jumped in an otter and went to a place called Bear Lake.
Okay.
And I don't know, there was a guy there that ran the lodge, and he would take people out hunting for bear. But his father, the guy that was there was his father was an ex-Navy guy in World War II who moved there. And his claim to fame, I don't know if this is true, but his claim to fame was that when they shut down polar bear hunting in Alaska, he'd take guys in a cub from where his place was, fly them into Siberia, hunt polar bears, get them, throw them back in the cub or skin them or whatever, bring them out. And then State Department went after him and said, hey, you got to stop doing this because you're causing international attacks. Did you ever heard of this guy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know his name, but.
Yeah, there was, so my friend that flew in Barrow, they used to get in a cub in March, when the days are long, and they would go 300 miles north of Barrow, and they would drop red cans on the ice, on a floating ice, and go find a polar bear and shoot it, and then fly back in a super cub at 40, 50 below zero. And there was probably 10 or 12 guides doing this, and there was the guys that were going to Siberia. An Eskimo can still kill a polar bear, but you can't do it as a guide anymore. And there's an abundance of them up there. I've seen them. They're not, a polar bear will eat you. He's kind of like a black bear. They're just as bad. But yeah, it's true, Bob. To Siberia from the coast of Alaska is less than an hour. When you get up, in the Arctic, it's less than an hour out of Kotzebue to Siberia. So anyway, it's probably all true. It's probably understated if you want to know the truth.
Any other questions? How many engine failures have you had?
I've only got about 3,500 hours. I'm still waiting for my first one. I'm test flying an airplane today, and I'm always thinking that engine's going to quit. But no, I've been lucky. I've been lucky. I have, and I fly almost all single engine airplanes. I had a multi-engine commercial instrument when I was 18, and I just had no use for that. I like flying bush airplanes, and I'm more at home. But the nice thing about a float plane is in Alaska, there's lots of places to put down. So if the engine does quit or it's not running right, you can put it down, and that's a big advantage. I feel safer in a float plane than I do just about anything. Yeah.
So, the pipe we used to deliver the super cubs on the coast of the factory. Lock Haven, they had a grass area out on the factory, used to wet down with hose, take off the coast, not amphibious coast, but float planes. And off we go.
Yeah, not uncommon. You can float plane has incredible, especially the Beaver, the Cub, the 185, incredible power. You can set them on the snow and take off. You can take off on a frozen lake. They don't probably get off shorter on a frozen lake, on floats than you would on on wheels. I mean, they really get off. It's amazing. They just go straight. Have you done it, Bill? Taking off on floats on the ice? Yeah.
Yeah, the glass and water situation is very hazardous.
Yep.
Dangerous.
Yep.
If you would describe how you would set up for a landing on a round lake, not all on the shore, but on a round lake, fully glassy water.
Well, my dad taught me at a pretty young age. He didn't believe in glassy water landings. The couple of glassy water landings, the textbook ones I did with him, he cussed me all the way to touchdown. Okay, it's a very precarious landing because you have no depth perception. I have caught myself about 4 times on one hand, I can count, where I totally lost my depth perception where I had it in a glassy water situation. It's usually close to dark when it happens. But my dad said, well, you come over as low as you can over the shoreline and find a couple of ducks. And ducks are the best thing because they'll get out of the way. You'll never hit them. Just land on the ducks. And every lake in Alaska is full of ducks. And I steer for the ducks. That's the best thing is the ducks. Well, they on ski flying when it's really white out, they'll throw spruce browse out and stuff like that. But probably the most dangerous thing you can do is land a float plane on a glassy water lake. It's probably it is just, you set up 100-foot rate of descent, maybe 15 miles an hour faster than touchdown speed and just come in and just hold it there and don't look at anything but the airspeed indicator and the rate of descent. Your VSI, don't look out the window. Don't do anything, and you'll feel the airplane touch down. And Bill knows that's probably the most dangerous thing we do on floats. And it's, when you get your float rating, it's just a license to go out and attempt to kill yourself. It really is. I mean, some of the funnest things I've ever done is to check out a 30,000-hour pilot in a float plane. And there are so many different ways to kill yourself. You can't get into it. You'll have guys will tell you, oh, I got a float rating. Well, how much time you got on float? 6 hours. And I'm going, okay, that's it. It's precarious. It's probably the hardest thing that we do. And as you get older, you got to know when you need that proverbial tap on your shoulder. I'm 64 and I think I got a few good years left in me. But anyway, that's it. I'm done. Yeah.